Lester Brown from the World Watch Institute writes wonderful books. He wrote World on Edge, Plan B 4.0. I think he's wonderful. But he kind of really, it seems like his focus is really on that we got to make sure we have enough food and water. And he keeps saying that, hey, our food supplies are actually lower than they used to be. And he's like, everyone has a short memory. 25 million people starved in China like some 50, 60, 70 years ago at some point. And he's talks about climate change, but he's very concerned about us actually having food shortages and water shortages, and what is the best actions to be taking to make sure that we are appropriately dealing with that. Because what he's also saying is when you have that, then you have failed states, and then that creates more volatility in the world.
But the third rail that underlies all that is population. Nobody wants to talk about it. And most people would say that at a sustainable level, back to sustainability, not only the 10 billion that is the current projection, 9.5 billion by mid-century, but even the current 7 billion people, as they all strive for the American or the Western lifestyle, is not a sustainable number. So when you really want to say, wait, let's stop fooling ourselves and avoiding the question, the 600-pound gorilla in the room, the fact is, as long as you want to let every person on the planet have as many kids as they want, and psychologically or morally we tend to want to let them do that, although population planning is certainly advanced in many areas and with great success. But nobody that I've seen can describe a sustainable planet at 7 billion people. And so as long as we keep skirting around the issues of the quality of water and how to keep the climate lower and how to, or warming, and how to produce enough energy, and tension about nuclear weapons, and the truth is we have to deal with a more basic problem about that. When we disrupted the natural balance through good medicine, I mean, no, I mean this positively, that if you think about it, there was a high mortality in man just like there was in other species until we came up with antiseptics and, and the normal things that changed. Right, that really very, very positive medical things. Well, at some point, if we were smart, we would have said, wait a minute, how do you go from 10% survival at birth to 90% survival and not change your policies about reproduction, if you think about it? That, in other words, we had the ability to change survivability on this planet. We did it. We through great medical change, okay? But somehow we didn't have the emotional ability to say, wait a minute, if we're going to go from high mortality rates, as in most populations at birth, and keep everybody alive we want to keep alive at birth and death, I mean at young age and old age, we're going to tinker with the population capacity of the planet. But nobody wants to talk about it. Or I mean population planning groups do, and a few groups do. We have to deal with that as part of our mix for the future that we want for our grandkids and great-grandkids. Because the truth is, as you say, I mean, whether it be the Catholic Church or other groups that don't want to deal with the population issue, that underlies most of the other problems. We can't pretend we're going to produce enough energy with enough clean water and keep the tensions out of the Middle East about nuclear weapons and all these other things headed for 10 billion people.
That brings in religion.
Okay.
Address it. Go on.
Well, fine, but with all the diverse religions, and listen,
to reproduce.
And religions spanning from, the Christian, Catholic religions to the Jew, to the Muslim, to all the to Buddhist, Hindu, and so on, religions are not uniform at all, of course. I mean, they're all over the place in terms of these attitudes. But the fastest growing religions on the planet right now, the Muslims, I believe encourage lots of children. And,
that's why they're fast-growing religions.
Right, that would make sense. Thank you. That makes sense. That's why you're the smart guy. So as we try and envision and talk about and advocate for a better world, which is what we're here doing, personally in our community, our families, our communities, our nations, and internationally, I think we really do need to responsibly look at this underlying question, that we have to begin to think about the really sensitive issue about population planning in a different way, because it underlies all these other issues: energy, food, water,
and then that brings
disease.
us back to women. how the Muslims treat the women, and they have to cover themselves up except for their eyes, and they're to be seen, and they're not to be seen actually, because they're provocative to men who might want to make more babies. But anyway, they still make more babies. I'm reading a very interesting book now called Headscarves and Hymens about how in Egypt, when women are arrested, the police examine them to see if they still have hymens. And it's a very common thing in Egypt and many Muslim countries. And if you're not a virgin in Saudi Arabia, you can't join the armed forces or anything like that, or in Egypt, because you don't have a hymen. It's quite extraordinary, this. But fundamentally, the women in many, many countries have babies after babies after babies after babies. We know how to stop it. We educate them and provide them. I mean, it wouldn't take much money in the scheme of things to provide all women with contraceptives and education about how to stop having babies. Or maybe we do a laser strata, which is a Greek play where the men kept fighting and fighting and killing each other, and finally the women said no sex until you stop fighting. They stopped. And that happened in Liberia too, recently. So there's the whole underlying dynamic of what you just addressed, I think, which we need to be brave enough to look at. And it's terribly serious. Yeah.
There's no way to solve this problem. Yeah. I don't think there's any way to solve this problem.
Of overpopulation?
Without dealing with population at some point.
Yep.
Right.
Maybe we just perform vasectomies on... No, I won't say that. I used to say we need to put contraceptives in the water supply of the world, and everyone can have as lots of sex as they want, and then eventually in 100 years we'll all die out, and that would be good for the elephants and the lions and tigers, and the earth wouldn't be any the less poor, the poorer without us. That's a joke. But there's reason why I said that.
There's currently a drought in California, which is an area that grows a lot of the food for the country and possibly other parts of the world. What should we be doing to prevent droughts?
Well, drought is, of course, changing weather patterns. And as somebody pointed out today, you know, climate, I guess it was... Seth, you were talking about the difference in climate and weather. I'm sorry, you had a good definition of that. That when we look at climate, and when you know, drought of what's 3 or 4 years now, I guess it's been an extreme drought in California, a record drought. Does that bridge into climate or not? I mean, it's certainly not quite to the climate test yet. But no doubt the weather patterns are changing and almost certainly linked to the changing ocean currents and the typical atmospheric currents like the jet stream. You know, the El Niños, La Niñas, and the Gulf Stream, or the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current. Those currents are changing, and it's partly affects everything from temperature regimes and why we get warmer temperatures in the Arctic, which is melting more snow, but colder temperatures in the East Coast of the United States and more snowfall. But the patterns we're used to are changing. And I think it's safe to say that the drought is probably related to that, would be the farthest we can go. Who knows how long it will persist. But what's happening is we've warmed the planet 1.5 degrees Fahrenheit, almost 1 degree Celsius. The temperature regimes in the ocean, which are really complicated, are changing. And we're measuring it, but measuring the miles of depth of ocean with the complexity of currents is really difficult to do. But there is stronger and stronger evidence that the shifting in these ocean currents, which looks like it does relate to warming the whole system, it makes sense, is going to create weird weather, unpredictable weather, patterns that are outside of the norm of patterns. And I think I said it in my talk this morning that you just keep hearing about more and more weird weather, like droughts or, you know, extreme rains in places and extreme snowfall in places, because we're used to expecting weather patterns. April showers bring May flowers, and hurricane seasons from June 1st to September 30th. And slowly but surely, all of those patterns are disappearing. And I think we need to, unfortunately, we have to get used to that, because as the planet is warming, those patterns of the last few thousand years that we become very used to are disappearing. And so when you ask, what are we going to do about drought? Well, we don't know. The problem is we don't know how long that drought will persist. But assuming it persists for another 2 or 3 years, California is going to have to make some really tough choices. And while most people think it's to stop people from planting lawns or having golf courses, 80% of their water goes to agriculture, which is one of the biggest earners for the state and the biggest producers for food. So this all starts to come together. And like you say, I mean, you can't move enough water easily. It's pumping water. I think pumping water right now in California takes 1/3 of the state's energy. I mean, pumping water takes a lot of energy, as Seth said. And desalinating water, which is the likely next step, has a big side effect. It takes energy, but the brine, what's left over after you've taken the fresh water out of the ocean water is a fairly toxic, not toxic, but dangerously salty substance that's not good for marine life either, and there's a huge amount of salt. So it's not without its own problems. So drought may limit California's growth or force California to give up agriculture, but people, I think, and again, Seth said it, that people are going to live where there's water. Do you want to?
Yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't move water from, like, I live near the Great Lakes. We're not worried about water there. We got plenty. It's the largest freshwater resource on the planet, so I'm okay. But you all have trouble because we can't move that water to you. You just can't do it. You can fill up tankers, super oil tankers all day long. You're not going to get enough water to sustain a city somewhere else. It's kind of funny, actually. The folks around the Great Lakes are actually worried about that. The states and Canadian provinces that border the Great Lakes passed or came to an agreement that they wouldn't allow any water to leave that watershed. So you can't take Great Lakes water outside of the geography where it would drain back into the Great Lakes again, because they were worried about exactly this kind of thing, that we know water scarcity is becoming a massive problem, and they were worried about, and there were some people like Japan, I think, was sending in some tanker ships to take water, but you can't move enough water to sustain another geography because it's just too much water. The volumes are gigantic, billions of gallons. You just can't move that on a daily basis. It's just not possible. So yeah, you got to live where the water is, and right now the water's not in California. And surely that drought will end at some point. That's not the new normal in California, that it will always be that amount of rainfall. We don't know when, and you can't stop droughts. They're going to get worse, but they were always there. I mean, droughts didn't just originate with climate change. They've always been around. It's just that they're getting worse, more frequent and more severe. And we're going to have to change the way we do agriculture to accommodate that. You end up with these important questions about, so in California, you say agriculture uses almost all the water. Absolutely true. But who deserves the water more? The farmer who's growing the food for 100,000 people, or those 100,000 people downstream in the city who would be eating that food? I mean, I don't know how you answer those types of questions. People just have to move.
I mean, the reality is that California has always had a drought. We are trying to grow strawberries in a desert. That water is not California's water. I mean, that came from the north to begin with. And so a big part of the problem is we have tried to engineer reality in a way that you have incredible agriculture across the southwestern United States because you have all this sunshine and we've figured out how to pipe in all this water, but it's not fundamentally a truly sustainable model to begin with. And we have to really revisit the way the entire southwestern United States has developed and recalibrate it to a point where it's adjusted somewhere closer to its natural water supply.
When you're thinking of the Southwest, of course, the cities like Tucson and Phoenix and these cities out in the desert, I mean, it's just bizarre when you fly over them. I'm sure you all have when you fly out west and you see these, millions and millions and millions of houses in places that are
And
naturally...
golf courses.
And, yeah, and golf courses, thank you. In places where there's naturally no water. I mean, it's just crazy. We are going to have to begin adapting to where the water is. The challenge is that even in modern times, in the last 100 or 200 years, we've had a stable climate. Now, climate, again, does change naturally, like the ice ages. That was a natural cycle every 100,000 years. What's really hard in our brains to get straight is that we were in this moment of stability for 5,000 years, where we're going from the warming phase to the cooling phase. And unfortunately, now we're going to the extra warming phase as the oceans rise and the glaciers melt and the temperatures rise. It's really hard for us to see that. But the fact is
we
that...
think in terms of human lifetime.
Right.
That's,
Yeah.
that's
right.
our real
And
problem.
on that note, I
Four-year
want to talk
political
about
cycles
food.
and-
Since the North American Free Trade Agreement and NAFTA and all this utter rubbish that the corporations are orchestrating behind our backs, our farmers in Australia had to plough their orange orchards under because we were getting orange juice from Brazil. And if you go into your supermarkets and look where your food comes from, it has a huge carbon footprint. They're importing stuff from all over the world. This is wicked, absolutely wicked. And there was talk today, I think, about communities living in small areas and having their own villages and coffee shops where people can mingle instead of driving lots of miles to go and get a pint of milk. And also growing community gardens and only eating what you can eat. And think of the pioneers, or what did you call them, the pilgrims, when they came here. They used to grow beans and everything and salt it during the winter. So they had food for the winter and tubers and potatoes and the like. Why shouldn't we go back to that again instead of thinking we can have strawberry shortcakes in the middle of winter? Huh? Or pavlovas, or do you know what a pavlova is? It's named after Anna Pavlova when she came to Australia, the Russian dancer. And it's a big meringue piled with cream and covered with berries and strawberries and raspberries. It's absolutely delicious and really bad for your heart.